you should be using your summer before your junior year to study for the SAT, and I'll tell you why, right?
I found Khan Academy is the best.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like,
But I think the questions on the ACT, because there's less time for each question, they're like easier, they're more straightforward,
Yeah.
they're easier to digest.
Yeah.
Right.
The adaptive problems in Khan Academy to be really helpful.
Okay. Welcome. What? This is episode 4 now.
this is episode 4.
Episode 4 of. Are we? I feel like we have to stick with it now. Like we've said it in every other
Podcast Insight.
Podcast
Yeah, a little
Insight.
bit. I guess we have to stick with it a little bit.
Incast pod site.
Mhm.
Pod site Incast.
And this is the SAT episode, but
Yeah.
it's also like standardized tests generally. Like, it's SAT because that's the test we all really chose to go with, but ACT will be touched on a little bit. Like
Yeah.
other stuff, we're not going to ignore everything else, but
Yeah.
it's mostly based on the SAT.
For sure. And today with us we have Samir and Bruno. Feel free to introduce yourselves.
Hi guys, I'm Bruno. I'm a rising senior, and I'm just excited to share my experiences with you guys.
Hi, I'm Samir. I'm a rising freshman at UCLA, studying mechanical engineering, and I'm also excited to share my experience with you and give some insight on the SAT.
Yeah. If you guys don't mind, can you tell us what you guys each scored on the SAT as of recently?
Yes, so I scored a 1540 on the SAT. I took it once. I'm considering taking it again for the purposes of like super scoring, just because my math score was a little bit lower than what I usually got on practice tests, and my reading score was a little bit higher. And we'll go a little bit into further detail about what exactly super scoring is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a 1550 on my first time. Then I took it again senior year and got a 1510. And yeah, we can also talk about super scoring. That was my intent too with taking it again. And yeah,
We can talk about super scoring right now.
Yeah, sure,
Okay,
let's talk
sure.
about it.
I mean, also, I think a good thing to note is that, like, between us four, we all have different, like, perspectives of what the SAT is, because
Yeah.
all of us have taken the old physical version at least once.
Yeah.
But now me and Audrey are both, we've both taken the digital version
Yeah.
once, and we're both set to take it one
Again,
more time.
yeah.
So I feel like there's a lot of different variety here, also considering that you're a senior, like, you took it a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
So when it comes to super scoring, like, how would you guys try to define that?
Do you want to?
Sure. I mean, it's just if you've taken it multiple times, you basically split the math and reading part. And, let's say the first time you got a 780 on math, and the second time you got like a 720. You'd use that 780 from the first time. If the first time you got a 720 on reading and the second time you got 760, you use that higher score from the second time and just merge them together to like 1540. That would be your super score.
I think it's also important to consider that, like, super scoring is mostly applicable. Like, there is like a handful of schools that are like, oh, we won't accept
Yeah.
your SAT score super scored. Like, we'll
Yeah.
just accept your flat out one.
Right. So certain schools, they will just want the highest score that you took in one sitting. And the other thing is that certain schools, you will have to like designate that this is like your super score.
Yeah.
Right. Which I'm not sure what colleges, how colleges perceive that.
Off the top of
But
my
really, what super scoring really is just like, like you take your highest math section from all of the SATs that you've taken, and then your highest reading section from all of the SATs you've taken, and you put them together for like the hiest possible
Yeah.
score. And then there is a super scoring process for the ACT as well
Yeah.
across the different sections too.
The ACT breakdown is just a little different because it's out of
'Cause they have-
36 rather
Yeah,
than 16.
it's just a little bit, yeah, it is different.
Yeah.
So, okay. So with that in mind, how did you guys prep for the SAT? Because you guys took it, it's probably been at least a year now since you guys have both taken it.
Yeah.
What was the preparation process for you? Like, especially considering that you took it a second time, was there like re-preparation, or did you just kind of go in just to like go in? Like, what did that look like, especially when it was physical? And we'll talk about what we did when
For
we had
our
to
digital.
shift
Yeah.
to digital in the middle
Yeah.
of the year.
Well, for me personally, I found Khan Academy is the best.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like, flat
Yeah.
out, it was perfect. It was really
Yeah,
good.
I mean, I didn't do any book preparation. I know that's helpful for some people. For my learning style, I found the adaptive, the adaptive problems in Khan Academy to be really helpful. All the reading practices would just target specific areas that they know you're struggling in. And for me, that was a lot more helpful than taking a general practice problems out of a book. The book can't learn from what you got wrong, right? So
That's true.
Yeah.
That's what I found.
Yeah. So I have to agree, right? Khan Academy was a totally very helpful resource. And yeah, I just want to really emphasize that you don't need to spend money at all, right? Not even spend a
Yeah.
lot of money. You don't need to spend money at all to reach your goal for the score that you might want on the SAT or the ACT. And the reason for that is because, you see a lot of people going out and buying prep books, going out and hiring tutors, and that's totally fine, right? If that is within your abilities. But it is by no means necessary. I did not hire a tutor. I did not buy a single prep book. I used a lot of Khan Academy, right? What I will stress is that I think for me, the most useful part of Khan Academy was probably just like the access to practice tests, right? Which were made by College Board. So they're very, very good. And then you can actually review your practice test, right? So you can see the specific questions you got wrong. So honestly, like the best way I learn is not from like reading from a book. It's just from doing as many problems as I can, and then reading the descriptions that the practice tests give you for each question about why this answer is right, why this answer is wrong. So I'd say try to do a lot of practice tests. I'd say that's probably like the most useful way to prepare for the SAT in combination with using the other resources.
It kind of helps you to like develop your test taking strategies as well, right?
Right.
Because again, with the SAT, there is like a time management aspect to it, which a lot of students do also struggle with, right? It's kind of like I have 5 minutes left and I have like 10 questions. Like, what do I do, right? But as you take the test, you get better at like managing your time and answering questions faster as you keep going. So that's another good thing.
I'll touch on what you just said about you don't have to spend that much money. Like the first time I took the SAT, like we just kind of looked up best SAT prep and we spent about like $1,000 at least on a Princeton review packet, and all that got me was like a 1370. And I have like these 3 huge books, and this was for the physical SAT. And then after I took that, I was like, I have to take it again. But by the next time I was going to take it, it was going to be digital. And that time I didn't spend a cent. I did the 5 Blue Book, because that's the app that they put digital on.
Yeah.
Those 5 practice tests like saved me. I took them like the week before, and I was like improving my score each time. And I did like the intensive Khan Academy stuff. All of that was completely free. Like, I don't know. I think it's a little different with physical. I think I do agree you don't necessarily have to spend money. But with physical, it was maybe a little bit more, maybe there was more of an incentive to. But now that it's digital, like the resources that are officially College Board, Khan Academy and Blue Book, like I got like 100-point score increase just by using those within like a month.
Yeah. And it's also because Khan Academy is now also partnering with College Board.
Yeah.
So, right, like you can literally like take a practice test on Blue Book and then they'll be like, oh, you can look at all your questions on Khan Academy and they'll give you like, questions and like which concepts you need to work on based on that, which is super helpful.
What did you do?
What did I do? Well, okay, I was actually, what I was going to say is, but it's also about investing time into like actually sitting there and like working, because it is kind of a grind, right? Like you have to be there, you're answering the questions, you're going over the concepts again. The old SAT was like 4 hours, right? So there's
Yeah, it was
that
a beast.
aspect to
and
it.
they cut it in half basically in terms of time with
like-
digital.
I know. I took it in May. I walked in at like 10. I left at like 12:30. Like it's
wow.
super
That's
nice.
The old one used to be super long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Old one you'd be out of there at like
It was a beast. Like it was a big test. And I get the incentive for switching it to digital. It just in my opinion, it just became easier in every single way.
Yeah.
I think.
it's just like your mental energy too, right? Like when you come out of like 2 hours of reading, you get your break and you come in for another 2 hours of math
Yeah.
and you have to do more reading for all those like really wordy problems. Sucks.
Yeah, you definitely needed to have a lot more stamina.
For sure.
physical.
Yeah, you had to worry about like pacing. Like I remember when I did Princeton Review, like there were these books with these crazy strategies that were like, okay, if this is like these are all the different kinds of problems they're gonna pick. If you see like these key words, then it means it's this one of these problems. And if you're not good at it, skip it because you don't have the time to do it. Like keep going. And like with digital, I didn't have to worry about it because I had like 25 questions on each module. I was like,
Yeah.
that's
I mean,
fine.
what I find with those books is that they're trying to like cast this wide net about what to do,
Mhm.
and they're kind of giving you like shortcuts, like equations that you can plug stuff into.
Yeah.
It
If
does
that
like
makes sense.
I do
Yeah.
think it like in theory is good. It's just a lot. Like so many of the tricks they tried to give me, I was like, I can't think of all of this
Yeah.
stuff. Like it was so much.
Yeah.
Right.
If I could say something to that, I think my old math teacher said this, but when it comes to like shortcuts and like quick easy fixes to things, it's better for like you to just come across that on your own and just like use them as you feel comfortable, right? When they're more naturally occurring, you're like, well, I remember like this is a good way to approach this question,
Yeah.
rather than like having to memorize strategies from a book,
Yeah,
right?
it's tough to just have to cram that much information.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I feel like, and for some people it works better. I
Yeah.
feel like you should take your first step should be to take a full practice test.
Yeah.
Or if you can't do that, at least like, you know, take a pared down version to figure out what you're struggling with.
Yeah.
Because for some people it might be that they have the foundation, they just need those shortcuts.
Yeah.
I would
Because,
say like
yeah.
someone going in completely blind to the SAT, just like never taken any practice tests, which again, any program is going to tell you start with a practice test,
Yeah.
but regardless, like just someone going in blind, maybe that's who that would work for. Like just needing to learn everything about what the test is like, maybe that's what it would be good for, like learning those strategies. But I think, and we can transition to this, for most of us, we took the PSAT and we already had a little bit of experience
Yeah.
prior.
Yeah.
I think depending on when you take the PSAT though, you may or may not have all the the math concepts or the reading concepts down to like score well on like an SAT, right? I think that's like another thing, right? Depending on how your school approaches their math curriculum and your foundational understanding of math or English, your score will also fluctuate. So for some people, it might take more work, and it just might take more time, like understanding the concepts before you can go on to like looking at strategies and looking at like this is what I should do and this is what I need to do, right?
Yeah, I think that's actually like a really good point. Before you really start focusing on tricks or test-taking strategies, it's important to make sure that you actually know all of the math concepts, right? Because I think in many ways, I think that's actually like one of the easier parts of the SAT. It's actually knowing the math concepts, because the math concepts themselves are not super hard. They're not super difficult to grasp, which is why like if that's the first thing that you really try to do is go through each math concept and either try to remember it if you learned it a while ago or try to learn it if you haven't gotten to that place in your school's curriculum yet. That should probably be your first step, because just knowing all the math concepts, that on its own is really going to help your math score like tremendously.
And that's generally also why people are more likely to score perfect on their math than their reading. Is like
Yeah.
it's literally just the concepts, right?
Well, I'll also say like even if you consider yourself advanced in math or anything, like for me when I was going back and looking at the concepts in preparation, I saw like stem and leaf plot from like 5th, 6th grade. I don't know what that is. Right? There's a lot of stuff from a while ago that you just have to relearn. And you know, it also helps your mental on the test if you like just come across a problem and don't know what to do. That can just be harmful for how you're feeling.
Yeah.
Right. No, for sure.
I feel like it's so much easier to like get a big jump in score with math, but with English, I feel like it's harder to like bridge the gap because there's no like definitive way to be like, okay, this is my boost. Like with math, you can finish a section and you can know for a fact you got every question right, you know?
Yeah.
Because some things it's just math, right?
Yeah, I think math is the more straightforward of the two. It's not necessarily the easier one to score higher of the two. So I actually scored higher on the reading section than on math. But I think it is the most straightforward in terms of like how you approach studying for math.
Yeah, I think there's a threshold, and once you like pass it, like I think it's really easy to get a good score on that section.
Yeah.
For reading, I thought Khan Academy's little practice mini parts were really helpful for me personally. That's just my learning style. I like to do stuff during class because I don't have too much free time, right? And those little sections, you don't have to take like an hour out of your time. You can take like 10 minutes for each chunk.
Yeah.
And that way I can get feedback really quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be doing Khan Academy math during class.
Yeah.
Like,
I think
2 months before my SAT.
Yeah.
I saw you in A push.
Yeah, it was just like all I had to do is just pull it up. It's 4 questions, right? Like it's so like
Like
I
the
feel
little
like it's just,
quizzes,
like such a
right?
good reward.
It's very
Yeah.
digestible.
Also,
Yes.
like that process of like, I feel like we've all done Khan Academy. You hate it when you get the last question right.
Yeah.
And you don't realize that whenever you restart it, it gives you so much value for studying. Like, it's 4 questions. Like in your mind, it's okay. I got to get 4 questions right. But if you're not getting it right every single time, and you do that thing like 3 times, it's like a lot of value for
Yeah.
that topic that you want to do. Like it's a really, really
Right.
good method
For
for
sure.
practicing and learning stuff.
The repetition, man, like that's so important. I think especially with English, like just like doing like reading questions over and over again, you start kind of understanding like the rhythm and like the comprehension behind like, oh, it's asking me what this word
Patterns.
means, like which one, because English is so, it can be very dependent on the person, right?
It's
Like,
subjective.
it can
Yeah.
be
all
kind
the
of
time.
subjective. I think that's the hard part.
I do
Like,
think they did a good job trying to make it as objective as possible.
Formulaic.
Yeah.
yeah, which is it's
Like
nice.
there aren't too many SAT verbal questions you'll find where it's like you think you could develop a really good argument like this isn't the right answer. Like they make it pretty clear, but it's still really difficult to like try to get into the head of like whoever wrote this test and be like,
Yeah.
okay, what are they thinking? Like what do they think this word means? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Especially with the grammar section. I think, did you say you struggled with that or
That was
something?
my hardest section.
Yeah, because there's a lot of questions where it's like, does this word work here? And you're like, well, yeah, but maybe they don't want it to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That old section, yeah, it was crazy. It was a little like
You have to
It was
get-
like which one's the best, like
it
what
was just
word
like
best
mind
fits in
games, I
this.
think. Yeah, that one was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say though, grammar is also very similar to math in that if you learn the rules and you understand like, oh, like which punctuation, like the punctuation, if you can get punctuation down, that's like a very good chunk of like the
Yeah.
grammar, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Oh, and like all the apostrophes and the possessive.
That was one thing I thought I would like. I was like, oh, I don't have to study that. Like it's punctuation.
You do.
Then I was like, what the hell? Like, what do I do with the semicolon?
What do I do with the
Those were
dash?
all of my incorrect questions.
I'm like a like I do a lot of journalism stuff, right? So like I edit articles, like I'm I was a copy editor for a little bit, and like still like I needed to go and review like the rules for all of like this grammar stuff, just to make sure that it wasn't
Yeah.
So
missing
finicky.
unnecessary points.
I mean, there's SAT grammar and then there's the grammar that
Right.
everyone else uses, right?
And you-
So
yeah, I guess my point is just that it's easy to feel like, oh, I know grammar, I'm a good writer, and then it's still probably important to review those concepts and
Yeah.
it is.
that information.
Yeah. So, let's talk about like digital versus physical for a second here. Because we have obviously both taken digital and you have both taken, well, actually, I guess we've all taken the written one as well. But like,
We haven't taken the digital.
Yeah.
oh, that's kind of
Yeah.
true. We haven't taken the digital. But I think like really quickly, what I want to touch on in terms of digital versus physical is prep changed a lot when the digital came out because
Yeah.
now all these like tutoring places that have had like years and years of practice
They got
tests,
so messed up.
it's
Like,
messed up. Like they can't guarantee you like a really good score.
we were in such a
if that
weird
makes
spot
sense.
when we were like we had to switch mid-year
Yeah.
because we were like, okay, like the program I had paid for Princeton Review, it lasted a year, but now all of those resources were like pertaining to a completely different test. They were like, oh, read this passage in this like time. I'm like, well, okay, the passages are only a paragraph now. Like everything was different. There's more like open answer math questions. It was weird, and none of the like college students that you might pay to tutor, they're like, oh, like maybe it's just the same. No, it's not. Like it's
Yeah.
half the time it's
They can help you
completely
conceptually,
reworked.
but-
There's no more like writing section anymore. Like it changed. It
Yeah.
changed a lot.
I mean, I'm sure you know because you're going to be taking it soon again,
Possibly.
or possibly.
Yeah.
But it's like what? It's like 30, 30, and then like another 30 and 30 for reading, and then math and math. Those are the sections,
And
right?
it used to be like 45, 50, 50 about.
Yeah, because they would
Something like that.
because they would
Which
do
is
what like
crazy.
reading, writing, and then math calculator, math note calculator.
Yeah.
Right. But now it's just reading, writing for two. They divide it. It's like 30 minutes and 30 minutes.
Mhm.
And then they do two math sections, but you can use a calculator. Oh my gosh! And they put like a Desmos graphing calculator.
Oh, yeah, I know.
On
which
the
is
SAT,
crazy.
which is-
like I plugged in a quadratic formula on the SAT.
Yeah, that's if you're taking the digital, familiarize yourself with the Desmos.
Oh, yeah.
program.
Yes.
nuts.
Yes.
They let you
Desmos.com.
use that. It's
Desmos.com. It
crazy.
will help you significantly if you're stuck on a question. You will never need the Desmos graphing calculators thing. There will always be a way to solve the questions algebraically or without using it.
That's true.
But oftentimes you will not remember how to do it, or you want to check your answer. And
Yeah.
Desmos is very, very
Yeah,
useful.
that's
So just
very
go to
true.
Desmos.com and familiarize yourself with the graphing calculator there
Yeah.
before you take the digital.
You know,
SAT.
also one of the scariest things, I would say the biggest, not drawback, but a big aspect of the digital SAT is the fact that, I forget the word, but it's like curved mid-test. So it takes however well you did on the
Adaptive.
first module. Yeah, it's adaptive. So I've seen like videos from people who are like, when I see that my math module 2 got significantly easier, and it means that you did really bad on the first one. So you have to hedge everything on that first 25 questions. Because if it gets easier on the second one, it doesn't matter because you already messed it up.
No.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
That's kind of weird.
I mean, everyone always talks about like the joke is always like digital SAT math section 2 is always like the hardest, like for some reason. Like people
That's good for you.
Yeah.
'Cause it means
well,
you did well.
it does, but like that means you're at such high risk of doing worse.
But then they also
that's true.
they make the second module worth less. The first one is worth more. I think it's like a 60-40 kind of percentage.
Oh my god, really?
Yeah, they make it worth more, but I think if you do worse, they make the second one worth more. Does
Oh,
that
I
make
see.
sense?
I mean,
They
it's
really try to
complicated.
make you succeed.
I would
guys.
say that, yeah, that's probably one of the bigger drawbacks of the digital one, right? Because it's less questions and less time, and because it's like this adaptive thing where if you don't do so well in the first module, your second module might get like, you know, it might not be as good for your score. I'd say that potentially like it can be more punishing, right? If you get just a couple questions wrong, it might like significantly decrease your score. It can be more punishing for all of the benefits, right? Like it's shorter, it's easier to get through. Stamina wise, there is that drawback. And I'd say like if you are struggling with that aspect of the digital SAT, you can always consider taking the ACT instead, right? Which is it has remained the same in the past few years. It is a you know, significantly longer test than the digital SAT, and as a result of that, it's similar to the old SAT in the sense that each question is not worth so much as like the digital SAT.
Yeah.
today.
You have to consider that like a 1500 a year ago allowed for like 5+ more errors than a 1500 does now because it's less questions. Like you could have made a lot more errors back then and
Right.
been okay with failing an entire passage. But now you have to be like, okay, I can get like 3-4 maximum.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a move to kind of push more people towards that mean, and try to like, because colleges have been removing the SAT from their accepted test scores.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a move by College Board to show them that it's a lot more accessible now, and
Yeah.
it's kind of working. Like Notre Dame is taking SAT scores. A lot of the Ivies are moving towards
Yeah.
taking them
Brown is
again.
going to required next year.
Yeah,
A lot of schools on the East Coast seem to be going back to like SAT scores.
I mean, I would argue it is more accessible.
Yeah.
I mean, just considering the fact that it was that the prep is free. I think the prep is a big deal.
Yeah.
That like there were these people and these businesses that were making like thousands more dollars than they really should have because they made these huge bucks and they get these kids into this
Yeah.
class. And frankly, like, is it necessary to spend all that money? I don't think so.
No.
At the time, maybe
Yeah.
it was because it was a really scary test. But at the end of the day, it wasn't that hard of a test. It was just like daunting. I
yeah.
think.
Everyone gets the same calculator too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
that's another thing. People could walk in with a TI 84 plus CE and have like a much better chance at the math portion, even if they don't know it as well
Yeah.
as like someone who's worse off financially can't afford it.
Yeah.
That's
Seriously?
true. That's
Someone
kind of crazy.
might have to.
Yeah.
People have
Yeah.
to borrow calculators that they're not familiar with.
Yeah.
Desmos is something that's free to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Graphing calculators, like they're very expensive, right? You'll have to like borrow one from a friend if you wanted to take a graphing calculator, you didn't have one of your own into the real SAT, because it would help you in the same way that having Desmos on the digital SAT can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think like, you know, the digital SAT, like it sort of advances equity in some ways, in the sense
Yeah.
and
I
like,
will also say too, to like the graphing calculator thing, like that's a whole like interface that you need to understand and use, and that's very beneficial if you are already familiar with a graphing calculator. But if like I don't know, if you don't have one, that's like a whole other thing. Like learning how to graph on one. Oh my god, on Desmos is kind of so much easier to graph on. You
So
just
much
type in the
easier,
Yeah,
equations.
it is.
Yeah, I will say though, another drawback of the digital is, who was I talking to? Someone, one of my friends up in like North Cal, their school, like the Wi-Fi just went out when she
Oh.
was taking the SAT, and they just didn't get to take the test, and then their time was like, you know, they didn't take it at the time. So what does that kind of mean for those students and their scores, right? And obviously you still have to like, there's a certain amount you still have to pay to like go take an SAT. I think it's like $65 to take an SAT. So yeah, I want to talk about prep really fast as someone who's done like SAT, like how well, like I was in cram school, like I did like a couple months of it, especially for the old SAT. I would go into an SAT place after school. I'd take the SAT for 4 hours. I'd get out of there at like 8, and then I'd come back the next day and they'd go over the entire test again for another 4 hours. So in 2 days, I had spent 8 hours at this SAT place, just going over the tests, right? And that like you can do that at home if that's like really something like that's a pretty solid way of going about it, is just take the test, I don't know, go to bed, wake up the next day and just really go over that test, grind those questions that like we've been talking. Khan has made that so much easier.
College Board has gotten nice because with Blue Book, since the two like sites are synced, after you finish your Blue Book test, the score is ready immediately. There's no curve.
Yeah.
Like those practice tests are immediately ready. You can go through every single question, has like a paragraph for each answer. This is why it's wrong. This is why the next one's right. Like there's a ridiculous amount of information that's completely free.
Right.
Like for once, College Board, which God bless them, they're actually like considering the way we feel. Like they are actually like wanting us to do really good, and they're being considerate, and they don't want money for once. It's crazy.
Yeah,
It's unprecedented.
Guys, we would not be plugging like an organization this much.
Yeah,
It's
it's like
not
it's
free.
one of the
Khan
most
Academy.
hated
I hate it.
organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's more of an emphasis on the Khan Academy, right? Which is free nonprofit, right? and stuff
They
like
made
that.
the move. They made the right. College Board made the right move by allying with one of our favorites.
And
I know. One
in
of our
in talking
kings.
about prep, right? Like, these days, I honestly think that if I take the digital SAT, right, my studying will not be. I will not be using different resources than what I used for the written one, right?
Yeah.
Because for the written one, I really mostly used Khan Academy, and I looked up stuff about like grammar conventions, and I studied that. Like I studied like a guide on that. That was free, right? And I think for the digital SAT, I think that's especially true, and because like just like what Taryn was saying, right? Like lots of the older resources, like heavy textbooks from the Princeton Review, they were almost wiped out. And they're still in development, right, in terms of creating new ones for the digital SAT, just because it's a completely different test.
Digital SAT kind of threw everyone for a loop. That's kind of it. I know a lot of prep places are now pushing the ACT actually, because that's the test they know more about now. Than
They're like, oh, we
digital.
don't recommend doing the digital because no one knows. They're only saying that because like they don't have anything.
It's
to
a
sell.
business
You
tactic.
can get
guys.
it for free. You
Yeah.
can get everything they can give you and more.
Yeah,
for free.
exactly.
I will say though, it also totally depends on the person. I mean,
Yeah.
conceptually, my math skills are really, really bad. So I'm working with a tutor right now to just get foundational math skills up,
Right.
because last test I scored like a 740 on my English, and then I got a 660 on math, right? So if I can even get that up like 100 points, that gives
And then
me
you can super score, too.
increasingly better score.
And I was maybe hoping we could talk briefly about the ACT. I think all of us have taken the pre-ACT. None of us have taken the actual.
I've
ACT.
taken an actual ACT.
Okay, you have.
Yeah.
And you got your score.
Yeah, I was like a 30. No, I was like probably like a 28 or something.
Okay.
But yeah.
So I mean, obviously, again, even though you have taken it, for all of us, our weapon of choice was SAT.
SAT,
At the end of
yeah.
the day, just because I would say even before digital, it was arguably easier, just because it was more of a mind games kind of test. Now it's inarguably easier, I think. But what does that look like comparing the two?
Okay.
Like just structurally and contextually, what does it look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I do want to draw like this sort of like distinction between like easier, right? Because it might be easier while you're taking the test, but the proportion of students that are getting a 1600 or the proportion of students that are cracking like above a 1500, that does not change, right? Because of the curve.
That's
true.
So in terms of like it is not necessarily the test itself might be easier, right? In terms of the questions, but it is not necessarily easier to get the score
is
that
a
you're
score.
looking for.
Yeah.
Because the curve is still broadly the same.
Yeah, that's
I'd like to
true.
point that out.
Yeah.
And I think easier also generally just depends on the
It
person.
is subjective.
Right.
It
Yeah.
is.
If I could talk to the ACT for a second. ACT used to be the shorter test because the SAT used to be 4 hours, and ACT is about 2.5 hours. And the thing with the ACT is it's more questions in less time. So like you'd have like 40, like I think reading still they give you like a 10-minute buffer, but it'd be like 45 minutes to do 35 questions. But then grammar would be 35 minutes to answer 45 questions, right? And then math would be the same thing. It'd be like you'd have like 20 minutes, 20 questions or something like
And
that.
then they have science, which is weird.
Science is
The reason I did not do it.
it's a lot of like
graphical analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah, critical thinking.
yeah.
Like,
I like personally, I feel that if I really, really tried for the ACT, maybe I could have done better than I did on the SAT. But for me, it was just a thing about time because I felt like there were so many more resources available for the SAT, and I just felt like it was the default. I feel like a lot of students feel that.
Yeah.
yeah.
If you're a science person, like I am a science person, you usually choose the ACT.
Yeah.
But you know, even within that group, a lot of people still choose the SAT
Yeah.
just because it's so much more accessible for resources.
Yeah, but that really depends on the person. I
Yeah.
will say one more thing about ACT in terms of questions is because the time is shorter, the questions are less like frou-frou, like Jenny has like 20 friends, but we're talking about like apples or something. Like they're a lot more direct because they don't have the time to like take you on like some sort of journey.
So you're
And-
saying like less word problems.
They're more digestible.
yeah,
they're
it's
sim-
very just like here's what we need you to do.
Right.
They're just testing
Yeah.
the concept.
And people will also say that like the actual questions on the ACT, I don't know if that's still true because I think the actual questions on the SAT are a little bit easier now. But I think the questions on the ACT, because there's less time for each question, they're like easier, they're more straightforward,
Yeah.
they're easier to digest.
Yeah.
Right. So what are you going to consider, right, when you're weighing these two, right? ACT versus SAT. One of the factors that you need to consider is prep available. So like free prep that's available, it is far more available for the SAT, right? Namely because the Khan Academy does not have free resources for the ACT. It is harder to find free practice tests for the ACT. So in terms of free prep, if that is something that you're looking for in terms of affordability, potentially the SAT, right? Another thing is like stamina, right? So like the SAT today is it is shorter than the ACT now, just because it is digital, right? So if you're the sort of person to really get worn out or finds it really difficult to sit through like 3 hours of testing, then maybe like the SAT again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like conversely, if you're the sort of person who like, you know, sort of works better with like shorter questions or like can get through a lot of questions in a short amount of time, as long as like they're straightforward, you might want to consider the ACT. Or maybe you like the idea of like, you know, maybe like, you know, you don't like the idea of taking a test where just a couple questions wrong can be really punishing for your score. So taking a test with more questions and longer time might be better for you.
more
I mean,
buffer.
you know, there's
Yeah.
a lot of factors that you need to consider.
So it really depends on who you
with
are.
SAT, you can get. This is crazy what I'm gonna say, but like SAT is the kind of test where like you can get a perfect score, like a straight B student can get a perfect score on the SAT. It's the kind of test where you can get away with not knowing as much and understanding how to maneuver around things. Does that make sense?
I partially agree.
My point is like you can get away with not having to know that much for the SAT. It's more
Yeah.
about understanding the test.
If you're the kind of student who like is able to cram, like really, really cram, you might not be, you know, the best at your foundationals, but if you are that type of student, you could. I've seen kids score really well in the SAT who are like that. To your point, but I also feel like
I don't think a straight B student will, but I'm saying like I think they could.
it's with the ACT. I've seen it's a lot more, you know, logical thinking. I mean, it also like really depends though, because on the SAT, if you are the kind of kid who understands foundationals, that
Yeah.
might be better suited for you too. It's like it really depends about how you think about things, how easily you're able to pare down a question into what it's really asking to get rid of all the fluff.
Yeah.
On the SAT, there's
Yeah.
a lot of fluff.
That's true.
Yes.
If
There's
you're
a
the
lot of fluff
yeah,
there, you're
if-
absolutely right.
And if you let that fluff like trick you
It
into
will kill
thinking that
you.
it's not
yeah,
fluff, that's who they don't want to succeed in this SAT.
Yeah.
Like they don't want people to get scared by just
Yeah.
a normal question because it's
Yeah.
like every now and then there is a big question,
Sometimes the
obviously.
question has like a paragraph of like information and then the answer's
you
like
don't
zero.
you don't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like especially for, you know, grammar. I see a lot of people. I'll come at this. I tutor people for the SAT too. I see a lot of them. They're like, they think about the question. They read through the grammar part and they're really focusing on what is the passage talking about. Like if it's talking about a blue anglerfish, you know, what's the significance of that when you're really supposed to be focusing on mainly the grammar and using the context to help you with that.
Yeah.
I agree. I didn't know you tutor. That's really cool. What other tips would you give in terms of like advice you've probably given to students that you've tutored in terms
Yeah.
of the SAT?
I mostly tutor math. But I mean, like I have people that have approached me about tutoring their daughter who's like 12, right? I'd say don't do that. Let your kid understand the math concepts in school. That's the best way to prepare at that age.
Yeah.
You don't want to be creating this relationship between testing for them that's so negative, right? You want them to be able to focus on school, understand what their teacher is saying, and be able to think about things in a way that really breaks it down and doesn't just put formulas into random places.
Yeah.
I'll tell you guys, I was in 6th grade when I took my first
I
practice
remember.
test for the SAT. Because my dad wants me to get into college. Bless his heart, right? He wants the best for me, right? Now, what I will say is that if you don't understand the concepts, it is very, very hard to study unless like you learn those concepts organically, right? So you need to learn like the math in school, right? Like I didn't know, like I knew 6th grade math, right? I did not know the math anything close to the math I needed to know for the actual SAT. So like, and this kind of goes back to what like Taryn was saying about like what I will say is like you cannot score like a perfect score unless like you know all of the concepts.
Yeah.
Right. You need to know all of like the math concepts, and that is probably like the best way to actually like the first step you should take when you're like looking at improving like your math score, for example, is actually knowing all the concepts.
Yeah.
And to that, I think that's where tutoring can be very helpful, right? You're
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
remedying
Yeah.
those concepts that maybe you didn't fully understand when you first
Right.
learned them, or maybe I think right now too, we're seeing a lot of, well, maybe the tail end of this, but a lot of that math you learned during like online school and COVID.
Oh,
How
yeah.
did that
Right, no,
impact
absolutely.
your
Yeah.
comprehension and your understanding, right?
Those are my blind spots for sure.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
I don't
Yeah.
remember doing this.
And like even if you're like at a higher level of math now, there's still math concepts that you learned a couple of years ago, right?
don't know.
During COVID that you just don't know, you
Stem
didn't
and leaf
learn, or you don't
plots.
remember.
Stem and leaf
Stem and
plots,
leaf
box plots,
Dude.
So like,
random statistical
I'd say like
plots.
if there's a place where tutoring might be helpful is actually in terms of like getting those foundations down, learning all of the concepts.
Yeah.
You know what?
I wouldn't say it's absolutely like I wouldn't say it's like necessary per se, but I think if you're the sort of person who really benefits from having someone there with you, like explaining things to you, I'd say like that's probably where you can get the most value from
I
tutoring.
think most like counselors and organizations will say that, once you're maybe on your third try, like if you're trying to bridge a really small gap, let's say the gap between 1550 and 1560, they will tell you that tutoring is what you need to do. But I would argue it's more, like objectively, once you get higher scores, it gets harder to get point increases.
Yeah.
I just think when you want to do that, when you want to fill that hole, it just means you have to put in more work. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a tutor, but if you really want to
Yeah.
bridge a small gap just to get like one less question wrong, it does mean you have to grind a lot more, I think.
100%. It depends on what you missed. too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why everyone says start with a practice test, because if you got a 1560 but you got an 800 English, 760 math, that's way different than the other way around, right? I'd say a lot of the people that I tutor, especially in Irvine, I've noticed they have this kind of schism because of COVID or something, like a big divide between what they learned before and what they're learning now, where now they're just kind of like trained to plug in formulas, and that's the kind of thing that won't really work on the SAT or the ACT in my opinion. Is plugging in formulas constantly, that doesn't really work.
Because it's kind of more than just plugging in formulas. You really have to like understand like what they're asking you for, what concepts they're trying to test with that question, right? Because sometimes you don't even need a formula. Sometimes it's a lot easier than you think it is. Again,
Yeah,
looking past the
100%.
fluff.
Yeah.
It's about comprehending the questions.
I was wondering if we could maybe, this is technically not SAT stuff, but I was wondering if we could maybe talk about how apparently I've just been hearing from teachers that AP exams are supposed to be going digital soon.
Yeah,
What is
I
that?
have
What's up
heard
with
about
that?
Part of the issue is that there were a lot of leaks this year. A lot. The entire bio exam got leaked.
That's crazy.
A few more. I don't know if you guys know about that, but
That's crazy.
it was like, there's a big concern from the executives and the graders, where it's like, if this keeps going on, can we count these scores? Because we can't just
You can't
have
even
someone
see who saw the leaks. Like you can't.
You can't really, because someone has like 50 Reddit accounts. How are you gonna know it's what's
Right.
there.
Or someone just knew the answer at the same time,
Yeah,
but it just
it's-
looks like they might have got like it's
Right.
just a really complicated situation.
And
Yeah.
like oftentimes like these leaks are available for sale for like $1,000 online, right?
Yeah.
Which is like, you know, which is terrible, right? Because if you have money, you might be able to like find
And
the whole
it's like
test.
illegal,
And
obviously.
it furthers the divide between, you know, less fortunate people financially versus like, you know, privileged people.
Yeah.
They're just going to keep going higher in the scores, and the other side is going to keep going lower.
Yeah.
And what you're left with is just this big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This big gap, right? Especially with like the way that they curve the test to adjust for like a certain amount of people.
You know,
getting
I will say, like,
fives and stuff.
in the last year, it actually, I will praise College Board for actually doing good damage control for the equity problems present in these exams. Like, I think I don't like doing digital stuff. I'm a pencil paper kind of guy, but you know, I can bite the bullet. But I think, especially given the leaks, making stuff digital, contrary to like popular belief, makes it harder, I think, to cheat. Like,
Yeah.
because they can have these
It
programs
does.
that absolutely lock down stuff. I know people will think like, oh, you can just like hack it or whatever. Like, like I don't know. Like it's I think it's harder to cheat than with physical stuff. There's just a lot of like ways to get around
I will
it.
say though, in terms of like equity and accessibility, while like a lot of the surface level stuff has been remedied in terms of like, oh, there are like these free prep. Again, if your foundational education is lacking,
Yeah.
and that comes down, oh my God, accessibility in schools, that's like a whole
That's
thing.
a
But
whole-
right,
yeah.
like if you're like your school district matters, like the school you're going to, how good your teachers are in teaching you these concepts that are important for the SAT. Or the ACT for that matter. Like if you're lacking that, and then let's say you can't afford a tutor to kind of help you with that gap, you're kind of stuck in this weird place where you're working really hard to try to get your score up, but maybe it's just not happening and you don't know why.
Right.
You know, again, Khan Academy does have concepts, right? And they do
Right,
have
they do.
like math tutoring. So if you do need that supplemental knowledge, you're just gonna have to put in a lot more hours, which sometimes time isn't even like something that they have.
available.
You know.
Right.
So there's definitely that. I've heard it's like you need to put in like 40 hours to increase your score like 100 points or something like that if you really need to work at it. But I think that again depends on the person.
Yeah.
I don't think you can say that like flat out.
Well, not like, oh, this is how much to that, but you know, like ballpark, like you need to be putting in time.
Yeah.
Like that's it. There's no really way to hack that part, I guess, right? You're just like you have to learn it.
Yeah, I'd say if you are, you know, someone that's struggling financially or from a family that's struggling financially and you don't have time or resources, the Reddit for SAT, as funny as it sounds, is actually really good. There's a lot of them. I think it's 1600.io. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's something like that, but that has every resource conceivable. It's a really, really good website. I didn't use it because I kind of expected to not do well first time. I did well, so I just stopped there. But like, if you are going for it, I think, you know, those forums and that website specifically is really good.
Yeah, I agree.
And just really quickly about like APs, like I actually have taken like online tests because schools have had the option of offering them. So for example, my AP World test this year was online, was digital, and I think last year like my computer science test was online. So I think next year though, I think is when they're starting to make many of them, if not all of them, required. And I think like the way AP tests like you know kind of they have a place in like this sort of podcast is because some schools have like this test flexible policy, which means that instead of submitting standardized test scores in the form of the SAT, you can submit standardized test scores in the form of AP tests.
Yeah.
So I think Yale, for example, more and more schools are requiring tests again, or they're going test flexible, which means that like you can replace an SAT score or replace an ACT score with like a couple of AP tests.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, like, let's keep talking about that.
It all
like,
comes from the same place, right? Obviously, College Board benefits no matter what.
Yeah.
right?
regardless. Yeah.
So, and that's okay.
I mean, I
guess.
think let's talk about like the place of like SAT tests or ACT tests in your application, right?
Yeah, I think that would be a good way
Yeah.
to figure that out.
A lot of people always wonder, it's like, okay, there are schools who are test optional. Is it worthwhile to put my test into the application? What do you guys think?
So, do you want to go or?
Yeah, I'll go ahead just quickly. I know a lot of schools, for example, Harvard, they are making tests required again because they have seen this pattern of people that are underprivileged or who don't have access to resources or who are, you know, lacking financial resources, they don't submit a score or they don't try for a score because they know that they're not going to do as well as somebody with a lot of money. Now, what I will say is that the reason why the SAT is now required again in many schools, and the reason why there's been a lot of research about why actually the SAT is not a bad thing for people who are under-resourced, but is actually a good thing for people who are under-resourced, is because colleges take into account your financial situation when you are submitting your SAT score.
Holistic review.
Right. So even if your SAT score is at like the 25th percentile of like the score for like an elite university, based on your financial circumstances, colleges might think that that is a plus for your application as opposed to a negative.
Yeah.
Right. And that's again why like there's more research coming out saying that like the SAT and standardized testing is good for people who don't have a lot of resources as opposed to bad for people that don't have a lot of resources.
Yeah.
So even if you don't think that your score will, you know, reach the 50th or the 75th percentile of like some school that you want to get into, I think you still need to consider your own situation, and that shouldn't rule out taking the submitting an SAT score or taking the SAT or the ACT at all. Just because colleges do take, you know, your family or your personal situation into account. And in many ways, even if you're not at the median or you're not at the mean SAT score or ACT score for that school, it can still be a helpful addition to your application.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. A year ago, because we were doing this project, like Project Insight, as a workshop at the time, we were telling younger kids, guys, these tests, they're out.
Don't
They're
worry
not good
about it.
anymore.
Don't
We were
worry
saying
about
that because at the time, everybody was like, well, we're going either not test required or completely test blind.
Yeah.
Like,
I
they
mean,
were
it was
just
mostly
kinda
in
like,
reaction to COVID, though. Like, that was
I
kind of
just
the
feel
thing.
like at the time, College Board and the SAT were just like falling out of favor. Like it was just becoming this idea like colleges just they didn't care that much. But then one of the students was like, well, I heard it was making a comeback. It did, because digital SAT actually really saved it. And I got to say, I actually, as much as I prefer doing physical stuff, I think it is for the best.
Yeah.
I got to do zero, like completely free prep.
Yeah.
And it definitely is making a comeback, because now we're seeing all these IBs saying, okay, we want to see your test scores. I think it provides a good way for someone like of a lower income to get an exactly like equal or higher score than someone of a higher income. Like it makes it more equitable. It makes it more fair. I do actually think now the SAT is kind of, it's definitely seeing its resurgence now.
Yeah, they're starting to like level the playing field a lot more. I will also say, like, I think another thing we always kind of forget was like the reason we went test optional was because like it was in response to like, you know, like quarantine and the pandemic, when you really couldn't go out and take a test in a room with a bunch of other people. That was literally like a huge safety hazard, right? So a lot of people didn't have test scores
And
to
they didn't
submit.
make it digital at the time for whatever
Yeah.
reason.
They made some of the
kind of-
APs kind of,
Yeah,
but
the
there
APs.
were a lot of issues with them. So
They just weren't ready for it.
Yeah, it wasn't like how we see digital now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think any of us really had to worry about.
No.
We were younger.
Yeah, we were a lot younger, but yeah, I think another thing too, I just want to say about like test scores in your application. If it's optional and you like scored really well, submit it. Like it only goes to like benefit your application.
You should also check averages and percentiles of
Yes.
your given school.
Research your schools. That's always
Like,
our big thing. Research
there
your
are some
schools.
schools that like a 1500 submitting that actually won't be good for you. Like there are some schools that have really high. I mean,
I
not
actually
necessarily.
don't think there's any situation
Yeah.
in which you should.
You don't think so?
Yeah.
Anything within the
If you
1500.
score
Like, 1500, sorry,
if you
that's
score
a little-
1500 or above, you
Yeah,
should
actually, most
absolutely
schools.
be
Yeah.
submitting. Even if that, because here's the thing, right? Like the median score for submitted SATs is a lot higher this application cycle because
Because people
it's
choose
self-selecting,
them. Yeah,
right?
true. Yeah.
So for example, like my brother, like he went to like this U Chicago admissions event, right? And then they were like, this is the highest like SAT like average SAT score we've ever had.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, of course it's the highest average SAT score you've ever had, because people with below average SAT scores did not submit their scores.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
True.
even if a 1500 is below average for your school, you should always be submitting that.
Yeah.
And even if it's lower than a 1500, again, I want to emphasize that, like, even if you're not at the mean or the median, even if you're not even at the 25th percentile, submitting the score based on your financial situation can still be a positive, right?
Yeah.
It can still be a big benefit.
What schools saw, and the reason why a lot of them shifted towards test required or test flexible, is because without the SAT, they're working with GPA and essays. And those two they found to be more malleable if you're rich, right? Because you can get tutors for everything. You can't get a tutor in the room with you taking the SAT.
Yeah.
You can get a tutor on your math homework, and you can get a tutor for your essays. That's why that's like the main overview of why they shifted, is because those two things are so malleable, and the SAT is comparatively less malleable.
I think the reason the SAT has stayed so relevant for like decades now is because the point of it is to test not who can take a test really well, but who just, it really, at the end of the day, it's just to test intelligence and common sense. And then it kind of, over time, as like more corporations figured out ways to like, you know, make money off of that, it kind of like that intent kind of faded. But they're making a comeback in terms of like making it about that. Like if you're smart and you have good common sense and you understand the two most basic concepts throughout all of like, you know, all of education as a kid,
Yeah.
you will do well in the SAT, and that's the point of it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To see that.
That's making a comeback also, not because College Board has just decided to be super nice. It's because, I mean, they want their scores to be included again. So these colleges are actually effectively pressuring them into making it inclusive. Yeah.
Making these changes.
Yeah.
At the end, I mean, it benefits everyone, but yeah, at the end of the day, they were, you know, as the test was getting less equitable, schools were like, okay, we don't want to see it anymore.
Yeah.
And then College Board was like, well, what do we do? Like, we need to make money.
I think you could say the same thing about AP scores. I mean, a lot of colleges aren't accepting as many. That's also just kind of because a lot more people are taking them. So yeah, you know, there's that kind of thing that's happening. I don't know. Did you, as like a senior, right? Once you got into college, like, what AP tests did you take? I'm just gonna.
Yeah. So, you mean like this year?
Yeah.
What I took? Okay. So I'm going to UCLA. If you could.
UCLA.
Yeah. With the UCs, there was this weird policy I didn't know about where they either take AP Lang or AP Lit. So that's one of the main things, is like, you know, that I still took the test for Lit because I paid for it, but it kind of sucks to sit in a room for what, 4 hours and just write a bunch of
You already got a
essays
5 online.
Yeah.
that don't matter. Yeah. And you know, this year I took bio, I took econ, I didn't take gov, I should have taken gov, and I took lit, and I think that's it. But yeah, AP scores, if you have like a pretty narrow list of colleges, you can already tell which ones you can skip.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
a lot of people just throw their stuff like everywhere.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of harder to, you know, decide which ones to skip because you don't know where
Yeah.
you're going to get into.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people. Hi, I told you it's bells. Okay.
It's okay.
Like a lot of people, like I dropped everything. I just took the econ test and I called it a day because that's like one of the
Yeah,
very few
yeah.
that my college would take or something like that, right? I was kind of thinking about this too. You said a lot of them are going digital. What are time writes going to look like now that we're going digital? Because I can type a lot faster than I can write. I'll tell you that
Wait,
much,
what?
right? Like, if tests are going digital, like AP tests, what's going to happen to all those time writes that we're doing, right? Because like Lang and Lit, you're literally just writing essays. So if you're typing your essays out, I feel like that's another like time thing. But I kind of want to talk about like this one last thing too. You're like 12-year-olds coming in for like SAT tutoring. Let's talk about timing for a second. Like, when is it the best time to take the SAT or the ACT? When should you start prepping? You know, what are your guys' thoughts on that? When did you take the SAT?
I took the SAT December of my junior year, so that would be 2022
Okay.
December.
So we did the exact same.
Yeah.
When did you take yours?
I took mine in November of my junior year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's around the same.
I
Thing.
would say, and I would say, first semester junior year is a great.
Right.
It's a sweet spot. It's a great time.
That's
to take
definitely a great time to start thinking about the SAT generally, right? Like, because that gives you like all of your junior year to prep basically.
Yeah. I mean, what I'll say is like, I would actually say you should start thinking about the SAT second semester sophomore year, which seems a little early, right? The reason why I say that is because you should be using your summer before your junior year to study for the SAT, and I'll tell you why, right? In most cases, summer before senior year, you're going to be busy with like writing essays, you're going to be busy with maybe internships or something like that. It's going to be very, very packed for you. Summer before junior year, you generally speaking will have more time.
Yep.
And you can use that to study for the SAT or the ACT. And then if you actually are able to take that test, maybe you take it like twice first semester junior year, maybe like in October and then in December. That'd be really good for you, right? Because if you can clear the SAT before second semester junior year, which I think most of us can agree is the more rigorous semester of junior year.
Yeah.
That's just going to be like really good for you because the amount of time that you have to study during junior year is going to be limited. So if you can study during the summer and maybe a little bit during first semester junior year, which is a little like better academically, I think, than second semester junior year, I think that will do you a lot of favors. I think like you should not be taking your first SAT first semester senior year. Like that should
No,
That's
never.
that's
Please do
like
not do
second or third or fourth.
I think-
territory.
not do that.
Well, you
In an ideal world, you will be done for semester junior year. It will make your life so much easier.
Yeah.
But
Right?
the
Like-
benefit of that is if you don't get the score you want, it still gives you like a year and a half. To
Right,
keep taking.
exactly. Plenty of time.
you have the PSAT though in junior year too. That's why I think first semester is good. What I did is I took the PSAT. That's like what, October, November kind of thing. After that, I studied for the PSAT. From the PSAT, I got to learn what I did wrong there, and that gives me just another path to study more towards December. That's why I think November, December, junior year is just the best to take your first one. Even if you're not super
Absolutely.
prepared, you should take the PSAT, and then that's just you're studying already there, right? So it's already
Yes.
fresh.
I agree.
I've heard there are like optimal tests to take if you want to score better.
That's
Because some people are like, oh, if you take it in like October or December, it's gonna be mostly like juniors and sophomores taking it, which means the curve might be better or stuff like that.
I mean,
Is
you
that
don't want
actually
to
a
overthink
thing?
that.
So
It
yeah,
could be
don't
possible.
overthink. Don't overthink. Choose it like. Don't overthink. Like choose a timeline that is best for you.
Yes.
In terms of your schedule, your workload. If you're really, really busy second semester junior year, study hard during the summer and during first semester so you can try to be done by first semester.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like, take it first semester. Like, I think even if like you will have time second semester junior year, or even if you're like, well, even have time first semester senior year, I think you should still take like a real SAT first semester junior year.
If
And you should have study during the summer.
I think if you want to be comfortable and not have to ever stress about the SAT once you start apps, the last SAT you should probably be taking is the August one, because that gives you a score that you can put on all your like early decision, early action, restricted early action,
absolutely.
right, and then all your other applications. If you take the one in October, you get the score back in like 2 weeks. You might not be able to put it on
it's
certain
tight.
applications. It's really tight, and you don't want to do that to yourself when you're already worrying about your essays and your other applications
Also, it's
and
good
getting
to get it
everything
out of
else
the way.
in order.
Register early though.
Yes,
for
Yeah,
August.
register
I was
so
about
early.
to get to that.
For
It's
August,
crazy.
it's impossible. I didn't get August because I
You
was
don't-
like,
I
I
didn't-
waited.
I
I
registered
didn't
for
get August. I didn't get August this year.
Guys, I
I'm
registered for
October.
August. I registered for August in like November.
Yeah,
2023.
You have to.
So you're
You
taking
have
it in August?
Yeah, and I got it I got it really close to my
She was
house.
earlier than me.
Good for you.
Everyone.
Oh,
wants
but
to take it in August.
Yeah, I'm
I
October.
registered late for the October one because I was like, okay, just in case, like I totally
took it in
bombed.
October. Yeah.
It's tight though, right? Like it doesn't mess it up.
I'm driving out
too
an
much.
hour to take my October
It's
SAT,
fine.
guys.
Yeah.
I know people who are driving like so long that they're staying the night in a hotel to take the SAT.
Yeah.
So like
I had a friend, she's at USC now, but she had to drive to Vegas to take her SAT, so she spent the night in Vegas and she
Oh,
took
wow.
her SAT the next day. Yeah.
I would
That's
say like a direct message to any incoming sophomores or juniors, specifically juniors. If you're about to be a junior,
start registering now.
Start now, please.
don't
Right after you
honestly
watch this
don't
podcast.
even do it. Don't even do a practice test. Just register first and then figure all
do
the
a
other stuff
practice
out.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you don't understand how much it fills up. You do not want to be
Oh my
driving
God,
that long.
this-
You don't want to get up at 3 a.m. to take one of the most
Yeah, it's
important
hard.
tests.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
Like
Yes,
please,
please.
like definitely like
I mean, I
if
started.
you are a
yeah.
rising junior right now.
I started looking into prep at the tail end of the summer and things worked out a little bit, but I still wish it was earlier. And anyone who's watching this, make
your
it
summer.
earlier.
Also-
Use your
And if you're about to be a sophomore, you're lucky. His guide, second semester sophomore year, and use the summer before junior year to prep. That's the
Yeah.
move.
Yeah.
It's
Because
the
you'll have
perfect
more
to do it.
time. A lot of if you want to pay for prep, a lot of places are doing summer boot
Fine.
camps
Do
right
whatever
now.
you want. I
They're
wouldn't
summer
recommend
boot
it,
camps.
but do it.
No, summer boot camps, they're happening right now. So if you're someone who needs to be like sat down in a room with like a teacher over your shoulder watching you do your SAT prep,
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of
'Cause
boot camps
I mean
are
sometimes like people really benefit from like that like intense environment. Like
Yeah.
like I know that I'm not as productive when I work at home. So I still take practice tests. I still took practice tests at home, but like I would actually come here to my community center to study because like it's like the change in environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think like
Yeah.
summer boot camps might be helpful for you.
Second semester sophomore year, I would say hammer math. If you need to get a tutor for that, because if you don't have a good foundation, it's good to learn that then
Yeah.
versus summer.
Right.
Because summer, you don't really have as many, you have a boot camp, but that's like a whole thing.
Right.
Versus, school, you can just talk to your teachers, talk to a friend to help you with it, get a private tutor. A lot of people tutor during the school year. And
Yeah. And I would say
Yes.
with math, the weird situation is there is some material on the math section that technically, like if you're on level, which I think all three of you are probably above level, I was on level. So my situation was that there was material that I wasn't set to learn until like the end of junior year that was on the SAT.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about getting ahead of it enough. So if you're on level in math, be prepared for stuff that isn't going to come straight to you
Yeah,
in the
you have to- you
classroom.
have to learn.
There is some stuff that like you're going to have to get ahead of a little bit.
And don't be super afraid, guys, because like honestly, like the actual concepts I wouldn't say are too difficult. So even if you're trying to like learn ahead, like I started with the SAT super early, as I told you guys. I was like learning ahead. It wasn't like unmanageable if you find like this sort of like learning strategies that work for you. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid to start early, even if you haven't like learned necessarily all the stuff that you need to know for like math, for example. I would say like, maybe take your first practice test like second semester sophomore year, use the summer to study, and then try your best to be like done first semester junior year. And if that doesn't work out, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
You have so much time left
Yeah.
before you need it.
That's the benefit of doing it at that time.
Yeah.
Just make sure like if you're a rising junior right now, like go look at like the dates and go look at like when registration opens for each of those dates, because they fill up
Locations, too.
At
really,
the very
really
least,
quickly.
decide, okay, ACT, SAT, none. I would not say none at this time. If you're a rising junior, I would say do one of those two. Either of them are an option, but definitely SAT is the cheaper one,
Right.
for sure.
yeah.
In terms of expenses, guys, something that you guys should look into. Many people qualify for fee waivers.
Yes.
If you are under resourced, that should not be the reason you do not take the SAT.
Yes.
So again, right, if you do not think your score is going to be good as somebody with a lot of money, even if that's true, just because of a resources barrier there, like colleges will still like it is very likely that you will still benefit from submitting your score. And two, like look into fee waivers. I have a couple of friends that got fee waivers successfully. You just like need to like do a little bit of research on your own.
And resources now, the best resources, like the absolute most valid resources you can use, they're all free. So
Absolutely.
Khan Academy, you guys. Also,
Khan
the
Academy.
summer you'll have more time to do it, so that's really great. Yeah, go ahead.
Another thing I'll say about under-resourced, like touching on what you said, is colleges, from the college application side of things, they'll look at your scores, average SAT score, and if you're above that, they'll consider that good.
Yeah.
Let's say you got a 1380 or like a 1350 and you're from a school where the average is a 1200. They're going to look at that as significantly
Yeah.
better, right?
They look at
than-
you in the context of your school.
of your school, mostly your school. That's why colleges really like the SAT now, is because they can look at the context for it better, because it's pretty standardized. Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. And that can be said about like the application process generally too. Like, I don't know, OSHA has like a million valedictorians, but if being a valedictorian at your school is like you and like 5 other kids, that makes you a lot more stand out than being a valedictorian at our school, for
Yeah.
example.
100%.
Okay, last thing. What is like your one like test taking strategy that you would like, I know we said like figure it out on your own, but like you would like really recommend to students?
That's a good question. I'll say like for like the reading section, like you can go fast. Like it's okay to go fast and rush through questions, at least for me. I think you should maybe experiment with this on your practice tests. Try going like fast on one of them and then going back to questions, or like flagging questions that you're not sure on. I think because like most reading questions, right, they're pretty straightforward. Most of the English questions are pretty straightforward and you can get them really quickly. It's just some of the questions that you can't. But if like you don't want to be in a situation where like you've done like, if you only get to do 3/4 of the questions on the English section, you want those 3/4 of the questions to be the questions that are quick and easy that you got right. So you don't want to be in a situation where like the questions that you don't do are just like the last questions on the test, right? Like
Yeah.
that should not be the situation. The questions that you don't do should be questions that are like harder, that anyways you might have gotten wrong. So don't be afraid to go quick, to skip through and then go back at the end. I would say like just go faster than maybe like what you think you're comfortable with. And this is not universal advice. None of this advice is universal, but maybe try that with a practice test or two.
Yeah.
And see how that works for you.
For me, the most universal advice I can give is this general structure that I use, where it's practice test, like Sunday, right? Then throughout the week in school, I'm doing the little Khan Academy mini tests, mini quizzes, right? Whenever I get free time at home, hammer that down. Then again, the next weekend, practice test. You repeat that, you're gonna get a good sense for time with the practice tests. You're gonna get a good sense for content with the mini tests and quizzes. And if you are someone that needs tutoring, please look for one in advance, at least a month or
Want to
half a
plug
month.
yourself? You can.
No, I'm saying, like, from my perspective, I can't help someone who just books it at the last week. There's nothing anyone can do for you other than give you formulas.
Yeah.
So if you need help with math, you need to look for someone a month in advance,
Yeah.
if you know you need help.
So don't try to cram the last week of the SAT,
Yeah.
So
guys.
how
the
far
last day
before your
especially.
exam do you do that little loop? How far do you start that before?
I started it, I think, about 2 months. It got more intense as I got closer.
So 8 tests total.
Uh,
8 practice tests, maybe 7.
so I started basically once every 2 weeks taking the practice.
Oh, okay.
And then I got more intense as I went forward. But yeah, it's a pretty good structure if you're able to do it. If not, even the mini tests are fine. I'd recommend the full test so you get a sense of time.
Yeah.
That's
Or at least just take a section. Like with
Yeah,
Blue
yeah.
Book, you can pause if you can only do like the first 28 minutes. or
Same with
something
Khan
like that.
Academy.
Yeah.
I think the whole thing is just learning to get familiar with the test, because once you do, frankly, it feels like a breeze, and you can get
Feels
I
better,
think
yeah.
for all of us by now, it's a really comfortable test. Like once you
Get
once you have a
comfortable
sense of
taking
it,
that test,
like
guys.
it really feels it feels
Yeah.
natural and it feels simple.
Yeah.
What is your advice then?
That is my advice.
Just take the test a lot and get used to.
I would say
timing?
I would say not take it. I would say take a lot of practice tests, and I would say take those and figure out what your weaknesses are, strengths, and then figure out what strategies you need to repeat.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
no matter what, repeat it.
Here's my advice because I'm very excited right now.
Hmm.
English, it's all a time game. Like Bruno was saying, you just gotta like some really. I'm gonna edit really dramatic music behind myself because I edit these videos. It's all a time game. Just take, if anything, like take the English a lot because that you're gonna start reading and comprehending faster. You're gonna start understanding, especially for reading comprehension, like how to do that. And then my strategy, especially if it's multiple choice, there are always 2 answers that are obviously the wrong answer. Okay. And if you're struggling from the beginning and you're like, I don't even know which 2 are the most wrong answers, study that concept. But there are the most 2, and then there are 2 that's like this is right, and then maybe this is right, but I'm not sure, right? And it's always those 2. You really think about the question in the context of the text, in the context of what they're asking you for, really what they're asking you for, because that'll help you whittle it down. So you're like, I'm pretty confident that it's this one over this one. And that helps you in English. I've used that on like my like AP history tests too. In terms of math, any score that's below like a 700, I would say that's mostly a conceptual thing, and you really have to grind the concepts for that. Anything above that, you start looking at test taking strategies. There are a million videos on YouTube about test taking strategies. Go on Reddit, there are test taking strategy videos and concepts there. The internet is a wonderful and also horrible place, but in this situation, take advantage of it. Find systems that work for you, especially if prep is the way to go. Do prep. If you can do it on your own, do it on your own. Save your parents some money. Like.
Yeah.
Whatever works best for you at the end of the day, but just take the test a lot. Get really familiar with the format and the timing. The timing is so important. If you're finishing and you don't finish all the questions, that is a problem that you should be focusing on as well.
And if you're really tired right now and you don't have motivation and you can't even think about doing a 2-hour test, just go on Khan Academy and do a 10-minute one. That's like the
Yes.
best way to start.
Yes.
That's how I started. I was like not motivated at all to start. I didn't want to. I just went on Khan Academy, forced myself through like an English one and a math one, and then it gets
so
going.
much easier than it seems.
So much
It really
easier.
is.
Just
Just
do it.
also
So,
register for one.
Do you
Just
think,
register
do you
for
think
test
when all is said and done, like as a group, we would say more often than not to anyone watching this, you should take the SAT? Would you say broadly recommend yes over no? Because I would say yes.
Yeah, I will say yes.
Rising junior,
I think
yeah, but rising sophomore, definitely start thinking about it, because it's gonna change. I think it's gonna
Yeah.
become
Yes.
required everywhere almost. And
Yeah.
it's,
Take, you know what? If you're really torn between the two, take both. Take a practice ACT. Take a practice. The ACT website actually does offer free practice tests.
Oh, I see.
Take one there. Take a practice SAT, and then decide from there, whichever one you prefer. Okay.
Yeah.
And then just
Everybody's
register.
different,
Just register for one because it's gonna. You don't want to have to drive an hour and a half to go take your SAT. So just register for one. Okay.
I think that's actually a really, really good point. Like, some people will do significantly better on the SAT than on the ACT, and vice versa. So, like, I think in almost all cases, it is very valuable to try both, to try a practice test for both, because, like, maybe, just maybe, you're, like, significantly better at one than the other.
Yeah.
It's true.
For
You
sure.
should look at both before making a decision.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
we're endorsing the SAT here, but more as like a if you've considered the ACT too, because you really should. They're both,
Yeah.
Solid tests and
Yeah.
important to take.
And you can pay for prep, or there are a lot of great online resources for the.
We shared like a billion.
a billion,
today,
but
so
but Khan really is the best one. Like
it's
there is
official.
no reason
Like
not to use it.
it's literally certified as
Yeah.
the most valid. So
Yeah, and I think especially if you're like, just starting out, that's a great way to like dip your toes into the like the water of like this whole like studying for the SAT, right? Before, I don't know, maybe you start like paying for really expensive prep for no reason. I know freshmen who are like going to SAT prep right now, and I'm like, damn guys, this is really how we're spending our summer. I'm so sorry.
you don't have to do that.
You don't have to do that. Second semester sophomore year is a great time to
Focus
think about
on your
it.
math.
Focus on your
Freshman-
math.
Yeah, focus on your math. Only do test taking strategies. I think summer, junior year.
Yeah.
And
Late
if you're an
sophomore year, you
overeager
have
sixth
to.
grader watching this,
Yeah,
don't.
don't
Just
do it.
don't.
You're an overeager sixth grader. Yes.
would you have told yourself
Well, I mean, it wasn't up to me. It was just my dad. making me do
Parents,
it.
don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's okay.
If you're an overeager parent of a sixth grader, come
Don't
back
worry
to this
about
video in a
it.
couple of
Yeah.
years.
And also, thank God we don't live in a country where the test is the only thing that determines your
Oh, yeah,
college
like-
acceptance.
Like
Yeah.
India.
Yeah,
like-
or
like-
like Korea.
Like definitely, like, what I will say is that many schools are going required now, but I think the weight that is placed on the SAT is less than it was
Yeah,
a
way
few years
less.
ago, even if it's
Don't
required.
worry about it too much, you guys.
Yeah.
There's letters of
Chill.
recommendation, there's essays, there's transcripts, there's so many other things to worry about in the college application process.
Don't worry about it. Worry about all the
Extracurriculars.
subjects too.
Extracurriculars, yes. Make sure that resume is flawless. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for coming
you.
today.
Yeah,
This
of
was
course.
so great. You guys were awesome and very insightful. I hope everyone watching gained something awesome from that. This is your camera. This is our camera. So let's say bye. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye. Podcast insight.
Podcast Insight, Incast, Podsite, Podsite, Incast.
okay